Hi, I'm Evy. I love my Sashiko machine. I hope that you have one too, and that's why you're watching this video. Baby Lock gave me the opportunity to show you some of my trunk show. Usually this travels around with me wherever I go to place and to different events, and gets loved and fondled and seen by lots of folks, and it's really hard to part with it from time to time. And today I'm remembering why as I'm going back through it. I have so much fun on this machine. This machine does that one sweet little stitch, right? But oh, the things that you can do with that stitch. When I first started out, I was just doing stitches, just sweet little stitches like this little vest. The bunny designs are actually templates that I cut using an embroidery design. Y'all have a stash of applique designs? All of those appliques have a running stitch outline. That is actually something that you can use to create your own die cut. So this little bunny is stitched on with those sweet little stitches. See how pretty that is? And look at that stitch around that edge. Isn't that just beautiful? I am just entranced with this stitch. I think that it is just so lovely. If it did nothing but that one little stitch, it would be worth it. Now that pink vest was one of the first ones that I ever did, but this is a recent project, and even though I've been doing some really fancy stuff with my Sassy girl, I'm still in love with this stitch. I mean, look! See that stitch? I used a monotone fabric, and I just used a colored thread to fill in the outlines of the print on the fabric. That's all I did. But look how awesome that looks, how dainty and how sweet. And I know a certain little miss who's going to look so cute in this. I also love to make jackets. Look at that stitch. There we are again. I've actually put my motifs around the bottom of the jacket and around the cuffs on the sleeves. Now these motifs, I traced them on using a water-soluble marker and designs from my Sashiko templates designs. I also used the bigger versions and made patches in the hoop and sewed them on with Sashiko stitch. Pretty cool, huh? Did you know that you can also create that with Sashiko though? This is flip stitching. This is actually double flip stitching with cording. So you're not sewing into your cord, you're sewing over it, you're couching it on. And the Sashiko machine does that beautifully because it has a stitch and it has a space, and you can make those independently. Anything you can stitch over, you can stitch on because it has that unique stitch and space. Now notice here, notice the button. See that? That button is actually decorated with flip stitch cording too, a covered button. And notice all the little detailing here. The beads, you'll have cord tails hanging on the end after you flip stitch cording in place. What better way to decorate them than with the bead on the end? Pretty, isn't it? And then you will notice that there's some machine embroidery that's getting into the mix here. If you've ever been at an event with me, you'll know that I say that all my machines play nicely together or they don't get floor space. Well, they really do, because you can see that I mix machine embroidery in too. You can see it there along the hem. And then a little bit of shiny stuff. Every girl likes shiny stuff, don't they? Now let's check out the sleeve here. Well, look at that finish across the sleeve. That's some really soft, kind of a flat ribbon type of yarn, knitting yarn, but when it's flip stitched, it looks just like a heavy cord laid across that seam. And this jacket, this is really fun. Now, sometimes people say to me, Evy, I'm not an artist. I can't draw things like you can do. Well, I don't feel like I'm an artist either, but I know how to borrow other artists' expertise, especially when I can find a beautiful print. Look at this pretty print. This is the Valerie Wells print. And it is actually voile fabric. So now we're using the Sashiko machine to sew on voile fabric. Pretty cool, isn't it? Look up close. You see the bird right here? Notice how this is a bird printed on the fabric, but notice how I have outlined it with flip stitch blue cord around there. Now it no longer looks so much like it's printed. It almost looks like I've thread painted in place, doesn't it? Isn't that neat? And look how it's outlined here on this little leaf and this little leaf. And I love being able to put these hangy-dangy things with my beads. I think it adds such a cool finish to it. I love to sew for children. I'm sure you've got some kids you like to sew for too. And putting a little bit of finished Sashiko stitching on the edges of things just tickles my fancy so much because it looks almost like piping, but it's not really piping. So you notice how that's right on the edge I call this flip stitching on the edge. So it actually has been done when the fabric was pulled out flat like this and then stitched in place. And then when the fabric is pressed together, you have this little edge extending past. Isn't that neat? So it's not piping, looks kind of like piping, maybe rickrack, but not quite rickrack. It has its own unique little finish, and I find myself doing this on so many things. I just love quilting with it too. You know, I wasn't a quilter. I guess you can tell by looking around here that most of my projects are garments because my background is in fashion design. But this machine is getting me hooked on quilting because look how fun it is. All the jump threads are on the back. Think about that. You know when you're sewing with a regular sewing machine and you're quilting around a motif or over a motif, you have to stop and cut your thread. But with this machine you don't because you can literally hop over it. And my class with the Baby Lock Sewing at Home will show you how to do that. But see how pretty the definition is added around the motifs. It just looks really sweet and really neat. I just love quilting things with the Sashiko now. Every project I have, it seems, I'm finding an excuse to quilt it with my Sassy girl. Like this little reed bag. I actually did this for a charity event and created this project for them. It was so much fun. And of course, Sassy girl had to get in the action. So not only did I quilt it using the Sashiko, doing my Sashiko hop, but I also added texture and detail to it. See this little swoop? My rockets flying away and the little swirlies in the grass. I followed along my lines to give that texture and dimension. Isn't that cool? But look at this. Now this is really fun. This is double Dutch flip stitching. So there's two cords and you're stitching them in place one at a time over on top of each other. And I'm going to be showing you how to do that too in my Sew at Home class. Now this was one of the first little quilts that I made just for the fun of it. This is actually patches created in the hoop with your embroidery machine. Did you know that you can patch in the hoop with your embroidery machine? I know, cool, isn't it? But look how fun it is just to do a grid quilt. This machine actually comes with a quilting bar guide. So you can set it up and stitch your grid across it any which way you want to. Simple and so sweet. And this quilt was made for Designs magazine. I really had fun with this. This is when I get to combine lots of different techniques and options with it. So we have just stitching right there. You see all the little branches stitched down. I have flip stitch cording, add some beads to make it fancy. And look at this, feather stitching. What about 3D, where my flower actually is supporting some flip stitched in place yarn on the underneath. And this is a fringe technique done on the Sashiko machine. That's machine embroidery, and all of the designs in this, including the embroidery design for the bird, this comes from my Garden Motifs tutorial book. This was a really fun project, really fun to make, and awesome on my wall. And this quilt was made to go with my Garden Motifs tutorial book, and it's showcasing all the designs that you can make with the designs that come with that book. But check it out, it was so fun. Let's look at this little bird right here. Look at the feathers on it. Those are stitches put in one at a time with the Sashiko machine. If you think that's slow, it really isn't. It goes so much faster than it would be done by hand. You can stitch it with the machine, and I'll show you how to do that in my Sew at Home class. And then look over here at this stitching, feather stitching on the pods. And let's check out this flower down here. See how it has a 3D flap? This was created in the embroidery machine and then sewn on using the Sashiko machine. Because even though the Sashiko machine has a decorative stitch, which you really don't want to hide, it's also a sew machine, so you can attach things using it. And then this once again is fringe, put on using the Sashiko machine. And then up here at the top, I just love how that little cross stitch makes a perfect end to those berries. And then look at this, doesn't that look like an apple blossom? Perfect apple blossom center with stitches radiating around in the side. I love this project. This was so fun to do. I don't know about y'all, but I have a hoard of stuff. Some people call it a stash. I learned recently that it's actually should be called a personal resource center, and I like that one. Very good. Well, I have a personal resource center with stuff that I don't really know what I'm ever going to do with, but it's too good to throw away. And in it was macrame cord, you know, that old stuff that really hurts your hand. But when I was working on this project, it came in so handy because I want you to look up close here. Look at that bamboo. Doesn't that look like a piece of bamboo? That's flip stitched, that old nasty hemp macrame cord that we used to weave baskets and things out of. That's flip stitched in place with a Sashiko machine. And that looks so cool. And then look over here at the bear. See how the stitches are around his chin there and around his arm here? See how it's feathered on the edge? So you can really create some awesome looking detailing and texture to your projects using that simple stitch done in different ways. If you did nothing else but just did this on the edge, isn't that pretty? This was a really fun project too. And my daughter keeps saying, Mom, when am I going to get to take that one home? And this quilt was so fun to do. This was a big project. I started off with a stocking to be sure that I could do it correctly. And I found a lot of places to add some sweet Sashiko detailing. Let's check out this right here. This is flip stitch cording, and I put it in across there and across here to soften the division. Sometimes when I'm working with two very strong fabrics and I'm sewing them together in something, it seems like they need a little bit of softening at the edge, just to sort of make them blend. Well, the flip stitch cording works perfectly for that. And then look at the top. See? Here again? What we have is stitching in the ditch, flip stitch in the ditch to create that pretty, looking like faux piping, faux rickrack insertion maybe. A total different look, all of its own. This was really fun to do, but this was when I discovered that it was a bit of a challenge to make a bigger piece on the Sashiko machine because, well, it's not our long arm quilter, is it? However, it's very doable. And what I found was easiest to do was to work on one block at a time. So I did all my Santa blocks, did all the embroidery, and then I went to my Sashiko machine and added backing behind the fabric and did the quilting on each one of those. And then I sewed the whole quilt together, added a piece of backing to the back of it, and then I quilted along the sashing. So as you can see, the quilting shows on the back through the sashing, but not on the Santa blocks. And what I did to keep the quilt from being raised in the place where the Santa blocks were, I just cut away the batting behind them. So it actually turned out to be very, very easy and very fun to do. And you'll notice all the flip stitch detailing that I added in there. That looks like a candy cane almost, doesn't it? Isn't that pretty? And then down here across here, it just adds such a delightful touch. People look at this and they go, oh, that must have taken you so long to hand stitch all that yarn in place. And I'm like, me and Sassy Girl, you'd be amazed at what we can do. And then I discovered that I could make pleats with the Sashiko machine. Okay, this was really fun. There was one evening that I did nothing but just pull out fabric from my stash and say, oh, I wonder what this will look like pleated. And soon I had this whole stack of pleating, and yeah, pretty much I had so many pleats that everybody in my family had to get a pleated pillow for Christmas that year. But look how nice that is. Look how awesome that looks. This is like old-fashioned ruching, the kind that used to be done by hand and used in wonderful garments. If you've ever seen Martha Pullen's antique trunk show with all those beautiful, you'll see some ruching in there. It's so pretty. And we can do this on our Sashiko machine. Check out this scarf. This was really fun to do. This is silk velvet, pleated on the Sashiko machine. And the cuffs are then sewn on there, and that's a little bit embellisher work. Isn't that pretty? Look at the softness to that. It has a very unique look. Like this little dress standing back here. Can you see the pleating in that bodice? Looks like smocking, doesn't it? But it was done using the Sashiko machine. Once again, one big piece of fabric, just pleated across the top, and then the little dress was cut out and assembled. So neat. Now then, let's check out this little dress up here at the front. Look at that sweet little stitch, making those butterflies and dragonflies dance across the dress. But I want you to especially notice the bottom. Look at the bottom hem. This is double fold bias cut fabric sewn using the Sashiko machine and the double fold bias binder that also fits on your Baby Lock serger to apply it with that sweet little stitch. How cool is that? Did you know that your Sashiko machine has these two little set screw holes there? So it will actually accommodate many of the attachments that fit on our sergers. Think of the things that you can do. Now look at this little outfit right here. Cross stitches on a little John John for a little boy. Isn't that sweet? If you think that takes a lot of time doing by hand, Just try it on your Sashiko machine. Lickety-split, you can have that block put into place. And this dress, this was so fun to make. My youngest daughter was needing something fancy to wear, so this was whipped up using bridal tulle. Yep, good old illusion. And it's sparkle illusion too. Yeah, I did have to clean my machine out really good after that. But check out those pleats. Not only did I put them around the neckline on the bodice, but I also put them on the hem. This was really fun. So dainty and delicate, isn't it? Look, flip stitch trim added in with those pleats. And the little things that hang down like that, those were die cuts. Sewed in place. There's a bead underneath of it that's keeping it on its little loop. But that's a continuous cord, flip stitched in place, and then just left to hang. And that's how I chose to finish it off. Any little girl would feel like a princess in this, wouldn't she? She's just missing her glass slipper, that's all. And this little pillow is something that I have just begun to play with, trapunto, using the Sashiko machine. Isn't that fun? Look up close here. See how I use the tiny little stitches with a tiny little space to pack the stitches in tightly so it tamps down the batting and lets the places that aren't stitched pop up. Remember that old-fashioned trapunto that we used to do with our sewing machines back in the 70s? Check it out. Isn't that cool? This pillow is one that we're going to explore a bit more in our Sew at Home class. But check it out. Isn't it sweet? See the little bird? Notice how this time, instead of using feather stitching, I actually used feather stitching and flip stitch cording to define the bird. So this is an embroidery design with Sashiko stitching on it. So you've seen by now that I like to jumpstart some of my Sashiko projects with the embroidery machine because, like I said, all my machines play nicely together in my studio. This is one of the things that I have really had the most fun with lately. As my collar on the little vest that I'm wearing, this flap on this purse, this is my Miss Betty purse pattern. Notice what I've done here. Doesn't that look like hand-done crewel embroidery? Look how the stitches are packed closely together, the flip stitch cording tightly together, not on top of each other, but really close, and it fills in an area. I've been calling this Sassy fill. Now, I didn't draw that flower. I did draw the design that's on my collar, but this flower is just the print of a beautiful piece of Riley Blake fabric. Isn't that just so cool how that you can create what looks like hand-done traditional crewel work with the Baby Lock Sashiko? Now this piece here was made for my oldest daughter. She looked like a princess in it too. But this is an organdy dress, and when I first started working on organdy, I thought, yeah, this is going to be really tough. But as you've seen in my other trunk show goodies, that organdy is fair game when it comes to Sashiko stitching. Notice how I've actually created the shadow work technique on this too, by applying some brown organdy behind this blue, and it actually shadows the area where my leaves are, making them pop out. And you'll notice my little cord tails, I didn't tuck them behind nice and neatly. I just left them hang. I think it looks rather organic like that. It looks really fun. This vest is something that I probably shouldn't have even attempted to do in the Sashiko machine, but oh my goodness, I'm so glad I did because it is so neat. It is an open weave silk fabric, very soft, very flimsy, got nothing much to sew on. So why in the world would you try to put Sashiko stitches on it? But the colors were just exactly what I needed for my appliques. So what I did was I actually applied my applique fabric with a fusible web, ironed good and tight to my soft silk open weave, and then I did my stitching on the applique fabric. The applique fabric supports the stitching, so the background fabric wasn't so important after all. And even on the front, you see that little bird, all those feather stitches, so sweetly supported by the fabric that's underneath. So don't be afraid to sew on anything, because if I can do it, you can do it too. Now let me tell you a little bit about another one of Baby Lock's most awesome creative machines that I love so much, the Embellisher. You've already seen some samples as I've been walking through the Sashiko trunk show with Embellisher details on them, and I want to point them out to you just a little bit more in detail. Now, if you think the Sashiko machine is simple, have you seen the Embellisher? There's just needles, no thread at all involved. Cool, huh? So we're actually needle felting, and I was introduced to this machine in South Carolina. Do you know what kind of weather we have in South Carolina? Hot, a little less hot, a little more hot, but hot pretty much. So do I needle felt wool and wool roving and all those beautiful things that you typically think of needle felting with? No, not so much. I met someone called Margot Duke, and she introduced me to needle felt and silk fabrics. Notice the detail on the silk fabrics that have been melded together with my Baby Lock embellisher on this note card. What I've actually done is taken scraps of different kinds of silk, silk velvet, silk dupioni, silk chiffon, silk batiste, whatever silk comes to hand is lying around my studio, and I needle felt them onto wash away stabilizer or a soft sheer cutaway stabilizer, and I create fabric from scraps of fabric. So you're creating something completely original and totally unique when you create fabric with the embellisher. And then that fabric you use to create awesome other projects. For instance, check it out. This purse lid here, this is my Miss Betty purse pattern. And all of the fabric that's on this flap was created with the embellisher using scraps of different black silk fabrics, needle felted together. And yep, that's machine embroidery, those little red flowers. And they're applied with little beads on the tops to keep them in place. But look at the Sashiko stitching. So I have a Sashiko quilted bag and a needle felted flap to go with it. 2 machines, no, 3 machines, because I have embroidery in there playing very nicely together. And you remember the scarf that I showed you early that we created the pleats with the Sashiko machine called Sassy pleats? Well, check the fringe that's down here. That was put on there using Baby Lock Sashiko machine. Each one of these petals that you see on here is created as a die cut. I do them all at once using my embroidery machine die cutting in the hoop, but you can also use your Silhouette Cameo to do that. And then they're tacked on with the embellisher onto silk cut velvet with some stabilizer on the back. And then once they're in place, the needle felting process actually creates the ruffling. So it makes the flowers sort of push up, sort of ruche up. And then I added some fancy fibers there with the needles again, and then did a little bit of free motion stitching with monofilament thread to hold them all in place. But that makes a pretty awesome cuff, doesn't it, on that shawl? And you remember this piece where I was showing the flip stitching of that embroidery floss? If you've ever done hand embroidery using metallic floss, yeah, it can be a real pain. But flip stitching in place of the Sashiko machine is a breeze, and I love using all of my old floss for that. But notice what I used for my fabric. This fabric is created with the embellisher. It's just scraps from 3 different weddings, actually, needle felted onto wash away stabilizer, and then free motion stitched with a monofilament thread. And then I added some embroidery, as you see the big bird design from my Little Bird Scrolls design. And then I added some ribbon yarn. You see the pieces right here, and little rosettes. And then I went and did the flip stitching, and I think that makes just such a lovely little detail. So what do you think of Baby Lock Sashiko now? I bet you would have just as much fun with her as I have been having. If you join me in my Sew at Home class, I'll be showing you how to do all of these amazing techniques with the Sashiko. And you can run, not walk, run to your nearest Baby Lock retailer and ask them how you can take one of these sweet, sassy girls home with you. Thanks for watching. Y'all go make more pretties.